Dawn broke not with the gentle light of a French spring, but with the artificial, nervous energy of a secret war. May 20th, 1944. Near the village of Brest, the very air seemed to hum with a deception so audacious it defied the very logic of warfare. This was not the front line of thunderous artillery and massed infantry. This was the shadow line, where victory was measured not in ground taken, but in minds clouded and plans misdirected. Here, in the quiet fields, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit so clandestine its very existence was a state secret, was preparing its greatest performance. They were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were artists, radio engineers, and sound technicians. A ghost army of 1,000 men tasked with the impossible, to become a force of 30,000. Their existence was a testament to a new kind of warfare, one fought not with brute force, but with sublime cunning, where the canvas was the battlefield and the enemy's perception was the target. This radical approach to combat, born from the necessity of preserving Allied lives and the strategic imperative of achieving surprise, represented a profound shift in military doctrine. It elevated the art of illusion to a weapon of mass strategic impact, recognizing that the human element, the enemy's intelligence apparatus, their command structure's biases, and their inherent need for certainty was the most vulnerable target on the battlefield. The very formation of the 23rd was an acknowledgement that the age of purely kinetic warfare was passing, giving way to a conflict where information and misdirection could be the ultimate force multiplier. The philosophical underpinnings of the Ghost Army's mission were rooted in the understanding that modern warfare was as much a psychological contest as a physical one. Their doctrine, which they executed with the precision of a Swiss watch and the flair of a theatrical production, was built upon three core pillars: visual, sonic, and radio deception. Each pillar was designed to reinforce the others, creating a seamless, multi-sensory illusion that was virtually impossible for the German High Command to dismiss. The goal was not merely to confuse the enemy, but to actively construct a false reality so compelling that the enemy would willingly invest their most precious resources, time, troops, and material, in responding to a threat that did not exist. This required an unprecedented level of interdisciplinary collaboration, blending the skills of Hollywood set designers with the rigorous discipline of military planning. The unit's leadership understood that for the illusion to hold, it had to be consistent, detailed, and, crucially, believable under close scrutiny. A single flaw in the paint on an inflatable tank, a misplaced radio message, or an unconvincing sound effect could unravel the entire operation, with potentially catastrophic consequences for the real invasion forces. Therefore, every detail, from the exact tread pattern on a rubberized Sherman to the specific dialect of a radio operator's fist, was meticulously researched and flawlessly executed. The men of the 23rd were not just impersonating an army, they were creating a perfect parallel military universe. What the German High Command, peering through their field glasses and listening on their crackling radios, believed was the entire US 6th Armored Division was in reality a masterpiece of illusion, a grand theatrical production staged on a continental scale. The visual deception component was the most overtly artistic. Inflatable rubber tanks, meticulously painted to cast authentic shadows and appear indistinguishable from the real M4 Shermans from a mere 500 yards away, were arranged in convincing formations across the fields. Their silent, rubberized hulks waiting to be given life by the enemy's own assumptions. These decoys, manufactured by the US Rubber Company, were marvels of wartime ingenuity. They were constructed of lightweight, durable rubberized canvas, supported by a simple framework of air-filled tubes, and could be inflated using a small air compressor or even a bicycle pump in a matter of minutes. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. A 30-ton Sherman tank could be reduced to a 90-pound package that two men could carry. The illusion was perfected by the artists of the 603rd Camouflage Engineers, who understood that the true challenge was not the shape, but the texture and light. They experimented endlessly with paint, texture, and even dust to ensure that the decoys absorbed and reflected sunlight in the same way as real steel armor. Giant latex trucks, which two men could lift and reposition under the cover of dusk, populated motor pools that buzzed with fabricated activity. These visual props were not static. They were constantly moved and repositioned to simulate the dynamic activity of a massive military encampment, including the creation of fake tank tracks in the mud and the construction of dummy bivouac areas, complete with laundry lines and mess hall smoke, all designed to satisfy the rigorous demands of German aerial reconnaissance. The visual deception extended to the smallest details, including the creation of fake divisional insignia and vehicle markings, applied to both the inflatable decoys and the real jeeps and trucks of the Ghost Army, further cementing the false identity they projected. But the true genius lay in the Masonic deception, an auditory hallucination imposed upon the enemy that was arguably the most effective tool in their arsenal. This was sonic war, a carefully choreographed audio play broadcast to the enemy's listening posts, each sound effect painstakingly recorded from actual units to withstand the scrutiny of German acoustic intelligence analysts who listened for the subtle tells of a fake, from massive speakers mounted on half-tracks. A symphony of military fabrication echoed across the valley. The guttural roar of tank engines being serviced, the metallic clatter of tracks on cobblestones, the shouted orders of sergeants mustering their platoons, even the distinct grinding sound of a bulldozer building a pontoon bridge. The sound library was a masterpiece of audio engineering, recorded at the highest fidelity available at the time by sound technicians from the Bell Labs and Hollywood. They captured the authentic sounds of every piece of equipment in the US Army's inventory, from the distinct whine of a Jeep engine starting to the heavy, rhythmic thud of artillery being loaded. These recordings were then mixed and layered onto massive, custom-made vinyl records, which were played back through powerful, directional speaker systems capable of projecting sound over distances of up to 15 miles. The operators were trained to adjust the volume and direction of the sound based on the time of day, the weather, and the expected location of German listening posts, creating a dynamic, living soundscape that perfectly mimicked the activity of a large active army unit. This complete sensory experience was designed to paint a picture of overwhelming force where only a fragile skeleton crew existed, convincing German intelligence that they were hearing the unmistakable sounds of a massive force preparing for imminent action. The psychological effect of this constant, overwhelming auditory presence cannot be overstated. It was a form of psychological conditioning, relentlessly reinforcing the visual lie with the seemingly irrefutable evidence of sound. The third, equally critical pillar was radio deception, executed by the signal company Special. This team of highly skilled radio operators was tasked with mimicking the entire radio network of a large army unit, a task far more complex than simply sending fake messages. They had to simulate the volume, the rhythm, and the unique operating style, the fist, of hundreds of individual operators across a massive, multi-divisional formation. They used the real call signs of the fictional FUSAG and their messages, deliberately sent in a lower-grade cipher the Germans were known to break, spoke of supply shortages, training exercises, and the impatient waiting of a massive poised force, feeding just enough believable friction to make the fiction utterly convincing. The sheer volume of radio traffic was a key element. A real army group generates a constant, complex stream of communications, and the signal company replicated this chaos with chilling accuracy. They meticulously studied the patterns of genuine military radio traffic, the peak hours, the types of messages exchanged, the typical errors and inefficiencies, and replicated them perfectly. This was a battle fought in the electromagnetic spectrum, where the Ghost Army's operators were masters of their craft, ensuring that German radio intercept units received a constant, high-volume stream of seemingly authentic intelligence that confirmed the visual and sonic deceptions. The combination of these three elements, the visual, the sonic, and the radio, created a deception that was not merely a collection of props, but a fully realized, three-dimensional military phantom. The man who orchestrated this grand deception was Colonel Harry L. Reeder, and later Colonel Clifford Simonson, but the true architects were men like Lieutenant Colonel Hilton Howell Rayleigh, a former journalist and theatrical producer who understood that the principles of a Broadway show could be applied to modern combat. The unit was a who's who of American creativity, a drafting room and design studio dropped into the heart of a war zone. The roster included not only military strategists, but also a galaxy of artists, designers, and engineers whose peacetime skills were uniquely suited to the task of illusion. Fashion designer Bill Blass, who used his sartorial skills to forge impeccable unit patches and uniforms for reconnaissance patrols that needed to look the part, ensuring that any German spy or captured soldier would report back the correct, albeit false, unit identification. Artist Ellsworth Kelly, whose future would be defined by minimalist sculpture, studied the play of light and shadow on armor to perfect the paint schemes of the inflatables, ensuring they absorbed and reflected light just like steel, thereby defeating the scrutiny of both the naked eye and aerial photography. Arthur Singer, whose future would be defined by iconic bird illustrations, but who here used his genius to create fake foliage and camouflage netting so botanically accurate it could fool a Stuka pilot in a high-speed dive. Their weapons were not bullets, but perception. Their doctrine, born from the British A Force in North Africa, was FUSAG, the first United States Army group, a phantom force that would haunt German strategic planning for the entire war, a spectral dagger poised at the throat of the Pas-de-Calais. The Ghost Army's existence was a gamble of epic proportions, a profound belief that a well-told lie, repeated and reinforced through every available channel, could be more powerful than a corps of very real tanks. The integration of these civilian creative talents into a military structure was a radical experiment, recognizing that the skills of observation, detail, and artistic representation were now crucial military assets. The psychological warfare was relentless and meticulously tailored. They knew the German military mind, its penchant for order, detail, and thorough intelligence analysis. They fed that appetite with a veritable banquet of fabricated data, leaving no stone of deception unturned. The entire operation was a masterclass in exploiting confirmation bias. German intelligence officers, already predisposed to believe that the most logical invasion point was the Pas-de-Calais, were constantly fed data that confirmed their existing theories. If a German listening post expected to hear the specific radio signature, the unique fist of a particular operator assigned to a specific division, the signal company, Special, would provide it with chilling accuracy. Mimicking the subtle tapping rhythm of individual radio men, the visual deception teams, the 603rd camouflage engineers, would send small brazen patrols in jeeps, deliberately marked with the insignia of the Phantom units, into local villages where German spies were known to operate, ensuring the intelligence would flow back through the correct channels. The men were under strict orders to never speak of their real unit, to live and breathe the lie of the 6th Armoured, or the 4th Infantry, or whatever legion they were impersonating. Even in the privacy of their own camps. They were actors on a stage where a missed cue, a broken prop, or a single careless word in a pub could mean the death of thousands on the bloody shores of Normandy, a weight of responsibility that rested on the shoulders of artists and designers. This deep immersion in their false identities was crucial. They had to become the army they were simulating, down to the smallest behavioral detail, to ensure the deception was airtight. The stakes were not just military, they were profoundly moral, as the success of their illusion directly translated into the survival of their comrades. But in those tense weeks before D-Day, the stakes were existential, and the entire Allied High Command held its breath. The success of Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy, hinged on one critical German belief, that the main assault would come at the Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel and the logical strategic choice. To sell this lie, the Ghost Army sprang into its first major operation, Operation Fortitude, a campaign of strategic misdirection on an unprecedented scale. While the real invasion force massed in the ports of southwestern England, the 23rd set up their theatrical stage in the east, opposite Calais, constructing a vast, intricate web of lies. This operation was divided into two main parts. Fortitude North, which aimed to hold German attention in Norway, and the far more critical Fortitude South, which focused on the Pas-de-Calais. The 23rd was the beating heart of Fortitude South. They built fake landing craft from canvas and scaffolding in the ports of Dover, their silhouettes convincingly massive to German reconnaissance flights circling high overhead. The sheer scale of the dummy port construction was a feat of engineering and camouflage in itself, designed to mimic the logistical preparations for a massive amphibious assault force. Their radio operators, masters of their craft, mimicked the chaotic, undisciplined traffic of an entire army group preparing for a monumental amphibious assault, a digital phantom growing in strength. The deception was so convincing that even General George S. Patton, the designated commander of the fictional FUSAG, was used as a key piece of the illusion, his highly visible movements and public appearances in the region lending an air of absolute authenticity to the phantom force. The Germans, convinced that only Patton would lead the main assault, were utterly fixated on the Pas-de-Calais, a strategic error that would prove fatal to their defense of France. What seemed to traditional soldiers like a bizarre assemblage of artists and technicians became the Allies' most potent strategic weapon, a force multiplier of incalculable value. The rubber tanks, which a single bullet or piece of shrapnel could deflate into a pathetic heap of canvas, were in fact a profound strength, not a weakness. Their very flimsiness meant they could be moved, collapsed, and redeployed with astonishing speed under cover of darkness, creating the illusion of a mobile, shifting force that could threaten multiple points along the front simultaneously. A battalion of 50 inflatable Shermans could be packed onto a few trucks, driven 50 miles under the cover of night, and inflated by a handful of men to appear as a fresh, full-strength armoured regiment arriving at the front at dawn. This strategic mobility allowed the Ghost Army to be in multiple places at once, a phantom menace that tied down entire German divisions in a deadly waiting game, forcing the enemy to spread their defences thin. The 23rd didn't just mimic the appearance of an army, they mimicked its entire life cycle, its radio chatter, its logistical tail, its patrol patterns, and its sonic footprint, creating a holistic and utterly believable entity in the mind of the enemy command. Their operational tempo was key. They would arrive at a location, deploy their full array of deceptions, visual, sonic and radio, for a short period, and then vanish overnight, leaving behind only the residual evidence of a large force that had just moved on. This constant, rapid movement amplified their perceived strength exponentially, making 1,000 men appear to be a constantly shifting army of tens of thousands. The moment of truth arrived not on D-Day itself, but in the agonizing weeks that followed, as the real fight for Normandy raged. The German 15th Army, one of the most powerful formations in the West, with over 150,000 men and hundreds of panzers, remained entrenched at the Pas de Calais, utterly convinced by the Ghost Army's masterful performance that the Normandy landings were merely a brilliant feint, a diversion before the main event. For 7 critical weeks, while the Allies fought a brutal, inch-by-inch battle to expand their fragile beachhead, these German forces were held in reserve, waiting for an invasion that would never come. Their guns silent and their tanks idle. This single successful deception, orchestrated in no small part by the 23rd, was arguably one of the most significant strategic achievements of the entire war, saving countless thousands of Allied lives on the beaches and in the treacherous hedgerows of Normandy, a victory won not with blood but with imagination. The decision by Hitler and the German High Command to keep the 15th Army stationary at Calais was the ultimate validation of the Ghost Army's work, a testament to the power of a perfectly executed lie. The delay in releasing these powerful reserve forces allowed the Allied beachhead to solidify and expand, transforming a precarious foothold into an unbreakable front. The strategic impact of this single act of deception cannot be overstated. It was the difference between a successful invasion and a costly, bloody failure. The very existence of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was justified in those 7 weeks of agonizing waiting, as their phantom army held a real army in check. But the Ghost Army's war was far from over. Their unique talents were now needed for tactical, frontline deceptions. As the Allies broke out of Normandy in the summer of 1944, the 23rd was dispatched to the front, its mission evolving from strategic maskirovka to battlefield trickery. Their new role was to act as a tactical shield and a force multiplier for advancing American armies, using their skills to divert enemy attention and resources away from real objectives. During our Operation Brittany, they simulated a massive force buildup near Brest, convincing the determined German garrison that a full-scale assault was imminent from one direction, while the real attack prepared to strike from another, a classic misdirection that saved untold numbers of American infantrymen. They used their sonic trucks to mimic the sound of engineer units building bridges at one point on the Moselle River, drawing German artillery fire and reserves to that location, while the actual crossing was made elsewhere with minimal opposition, a sonic decoy of profound tactical value. This transition from grand strategic deception to localized tactical illusion demonstrated the versatility of the unit and the universal applicability of their methods. Each operation was a high-stakes magic trick, a sleight of hand performed under the watchful eyes of a deadly and determined enemy, where detection meant immediate and overwhelming attack. The men of the 23rd lived with a unique kind of terror, the fear not of a direct assault, but of discovery, of a single enemy patrol breaking through the lines and exposing the entire charade. turning their inflatable army into a death trap for them and jeopardizing the entire front. They were often positioned in the most vulnerable sectors, intentionally drawing fire and attention, a form of self-sacrifice where the risk was not of being killed by the enemy, but of being killed after. The enemy realized they had been fooled. The psychological pressure of this constant high-stakes bluff was immense, a burden carried by every man in the unit. Their most daring and psychologically harrowing performance came during the darkest, most desperate days of the Battle of the Bulge, December 1944. The Ardennes forest was collapsing under the weight of Hitler's final, furious offensive. The American lines were shattered, units decimated and in disarray, and a gaping hole existed in the front, threatening a catastrophic German breakthrough. Into this chaos raced the Ghost Army, their trucks laden with inflatables and recording equipment. Their mission was seemingly suicidal: to hold a critical 22-mile sector of the front along the Luxembourg-German border with nothing but their illusions, to stand as a bulwark against the German tide without any real firepower. For 7 days and nights, they became the 6th Armoured Division in its entirety, a desperate and brilliant act of theatrical warfare. They moved their inflatable tanks and trucks constantly under cover of fog and dusk, creating the illusion of fresh tank battalions moving into position and shifting their defensive strongpoints. Their radio operators flooded the airwaves with the intricate traffic of an entire division, from frantic orders to logistical requests for fuel and ammunition, creating a digital phantom of such complexity and volume that German intelligence could not dismiss it. The sheer audacity of placing a 1,000-man unit with no heavy weapons in the path of a massive German armoured thrust underscored the desperate nature of the Allied situation. The success of the operation hinged entirely on the German belief in the intelligence they were receiving, a belief the Ghost Army was determined to reinforce with every tool at their disposal. The weather, characterized by heavy fog and low cloud cover, ironically aided the visual deception, limiting German aerial reconnaissance and forcing them to rely more heavily on ground observation and radio intercepts, both domains where the Ghost Army excelled. The tension during those 7 days was unbearable, a constant, gnawing fear that sat in the stomach of every man. They had no heavy weapons, no real armor to speak of. Their only defense was the credibility of their own fiction. If a single German panzer commander had grown suspicious and decided to probe their position with a platoon of infantry, the entire line would have vaporized in a spectacle of deflating rubber and static, the men slaughtered or captured. They were a tripwire, a bluff of monumental proportions played for the highest stakes imaginable. But miraculously the bluff held. The German commanders, observing the evidence of a fresh, powerful, and rapidly deploying armoured division reinforcing a critical sector, hesitated, recalculated their plans, and ultimately redirected their attacks to what they perceived as softer spots in the line. In that moment, the Ghost Army, armed with little more than paint, speakers, recorded sounds, and sheer, unadulterated audacity, had stopped steel with shadow, had halted a real army with an imaginary one. They had fought a division-sized battle for a week without firing a single shot in anger, and through the power of perception alone, they had won. The strategic value of this single action was immense, buying critical time for the real American forces to regroup and establish a solid defensive line, thereby contributing directly to the stabilization of the entire southern flank of the Bulge. The men of the 23rd, the artists and sound engineers, had proven themselves to be among the most effective soldiers of the war, their courage measured not in the bullets they fired, but in the lies they so convincingly told. When the war in Europe finally ended, the Ghost Army packed up its props and faded into history, its story classified top secret and buried for decades in military archives. The secrecy surrounding their operations was so profound that even their own families and many of the units they supported remained unaware of their true mission for over 50 years. They had conducted over 20 major deception operations across Europe, and conservative estimates suggest their illusions saved an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 Allied lives. But their legacy was more than just a tally of lives saved in specific engagements. It was a fundamental rewriting of the rules of engagement for the modern era. They proved, conclusively and dramatically, that in the 20th century and beyond, information itself is a primary battlefield, a domain as critical as the air, land, and sea. Their pioneering techniques of sonic deception, visual misdirection, and targeted psychological operations became the foundational bedrock for modern electronic warfare. Sophisticated psychological operations, PSYOPs, and entire military deception doctrine. The inflatable tanks and carefully scripted fake radio traffic of 1944 were the direct ancestors of the stealth fighter, advanced radar jamming, and the cyber warfare of today. The principles they pioneered, the use of minimal force to create the illusion of overwhelming strength, the systematic exploitation of enemy intelligence biases, and the integration of artistic and technical skills for military ends, are now standard practice in modern military planning. They were the first true warriors of the non-kinetic domain, the artists and technicians who demonstrated that the most powerful weapon is sometimes not the one that destroys the body, but the one that conquers the mind, that shapes reality itself in the mind of the adversary. Their entire war was one of perception, a grand narrative woven to convince and confound. And in the vast, brutal theatre of World War II, their performance was the most critically acclaimed and consequentially decisive, never seen by the public it protected. The eventual declassification of their story in 1996 finally brought well-deserved recognition to these unsung heroes, cementing their place as one of the most unique and strategically vital units in military history. The Ghost Army remains a powerful, enduring symbol of how intelligence, creativity, and a little bit of theatrical flair can triumph over brute force. The profound impact of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops extended beyond the immediate theatre of operations, influencing post-war military and intelligence thinking in ways that are still being felt today. Their work laid the groundwork for the modern concept of information warfare, a term that encompasses everything from electronic countermeasures to psychological operations. The systematic use of sonic and radio deception, which they perfected, became a standard component of military planning, evolving into sophisticated electronic warfare systems that can jam, spoof, and mislead enemy sensors and communications. The unit's success validated the integration of unconventional skills into the military machine. The lesson was clear. The modern battlefield requires not just soldiers, but also artists, scientists, and communicators. This interdisciplinary approach to military problem-solving became a template for the formation of specialized units in the decades that followed, units dedicated to the non-kinetic aspects of conflict. Furthermore, the Ghost Army's story serves as a powerful case study in the power of strategic ambiguity and the manipulation of the enemy's decision-making cycle. By creating a credible, persistent, yet ultimately false threat, they forced the German High Command to make strategic choices based on faulty intelligence, thereby achieving a strategic victory without engaging in direct combat. This principle, winning by shaping the enemy's perception, is now a cornerstone of modern military strategy, from the deployment of stealth technology to the use of cyber operations to sow confusion and doubt. The legacy of the Ghost Army is not merely a historical footnote of a clever trick. It is a fundamental chapter in the evolution of warfare itself, demonstrating that the human mind, with its biases and vulnerabilities, is the ultimate theatre of war. The men who carried rubber tanks and played sound effects were, in essence, the pioneers of the digital age of conflict, recognizing long before the advent of the internet that the manipulation of information is the most powerful weapon of all. Their story is a timeless reminder that creativity, when coupled with courage and discipline, can be the most decisive factor in any conflict. The silence that followed their declassification was a final, fitting tribute to a unit whose greatest achievements were defined by the noise and visual spectacle of an army that never was. Their collective memory is a monument to the power of the imagination, a force more formidable than any tank or division. The detailed operational logs, now partially declassified, reveal a unit that was constantly innovating, adapting their illusions to the specific German responses they observed, a continuous feedback loop of deception and counter-deception that kept them one step ahead of the enemy's intelligence apparatus. This adaptability, this commitment to the art of the lie, is perhaps the most enduring lesson they left behind for future generations of military strategists. Their war was a secret symphony, and they were its brilliant unsung conductors. Manus.